Hi, everyone. Welcome to the All Things Amyloid podcast, where we feature patients, caregivers, and clinicians who discuss amyloidosis, a rare and incurable disease. Amyloidosis occurs when the body builds up abnormal amounts of misfolded amyloid protein, which can lead to serious and life threatening outcomes. I'm your host, Mackenzie, an amyloidosis patient and founder of Mackenzie's Mission. Our goal for this podcast is to raise awareness and share firsthand what it's like to live with this disease, to care for those affected by it, and to treat it. We hope this leads to earlier diagnosis and start of treatment, which will improve patient lives. In today's episode, we'll be talking about amyloidosis genetic counseling and what you need to know. I'm happy to have with me Lucas Pereira, a certified genetic counselor at Boston Medical Center's Amyloidosis Center. Genetic counselors are healthcare providers with advanced training in medical genetics and counseling to guide and support patients seeking more information about how inherited diseases and conditions might affect them or their families. Additionally, they help interpret genetic tests based on your personal and family history. Our discussion today is important for our listeners, specifically those with one of the more than 130 genetic variants of hereditary amyloidosis, which is passed down from generation to generation within families. This will be an excellent episode to learn about the basics of genetic counseling from one who knows best. Welcome, Lucas. We're so delighted to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mackenzie. Glad to be here.
Of course, as we've talked about, genetic counseling is extremely important for those in our community, for particularly the patients that carry the hereditary variant. So, hearing from an expert like you is valuable information. So let's start with learning more about your background, what your training looked like, and what that road looks like to become a certified genetic counselor.
Absolutely. So, my undergraduate training, my bachelor's is actually in biology. So, to become a genetic counselor, a lot like a few other health professions, your bachelor's can be in a few different things, but a lot of people decide to go into life sciences to meet the prereqs. So, there are more than 60 accredited master's programs in the US and Canada. So, it's specifically a master's in genetic counseling. To become a certified genetic counselor, be able to sit for the certification board exam. So, prereqs in undergrad usually include things like genetics, of course, along with things like statistics, biochemistry, and sometimes psychology, depending on the program. And then in graduate school itself, we go a lot deeper into clinical genetics across a variety of specialties. And we also learn about counseling theory. We really want to bridge together that biomedical side with the genetics, technical information, with that more humanistic psychology in order to be able to break down this information and deliver it to people in a way that they can understand, in a way that they can hopefully process and adapt to. And then, along with all that coursework, we have our clinical rotations to be able to put what we learn in the classroom into a practical setting.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really have quite an extensive training process to be able to get to where you are and work with patients in the clinic, which is great for our audience to know. What would you say is the purpose or the benefit of meeting with a genetic counselor? So, what are the kinds of things that you might discuss with your patients?
When I meet with patients, I talk about in detail like the benefits and the drawbacks of genetic testing, including some things that people may not necessarily think about. So, one of the common things that I talk about with people in the amyloidosis center at BU with their family members is life insurance. So, for a
Mm.
lot of genetic conditions, people want to have this information, but it's important for them to know that if they test positive, even if they don't have symptoms, they might still run into difficulties with applying for things like life insurance.
Mm.
And that's not something that a lot of people think about, especially at younger ages. So I feel like that's one of the major drawbacks that I discuss with people. Along with that is really preparing them for uh, the risks and the uncertainties that might even come depending on what the result is, positive or negative. You know, someone testing positive for a condition like hereditary amyloidosis, I can't tell them, okay, we see how this disease affected the members of your family, so we can 100% perfectly predict how that's going to affect you. Like, that's unfortunately not the case. There's still that level of uncertainty. And so
Mhm.
it's really helping them adapt to all of this information and help them digest it.
So do you also interface with the patient's larger amyloidosis medical team? I know you play such an important role, but do you get involved with, say, the physicians or the people who provide medical care? Um, and when I say medical care, I mean like developing treatment plans, monitoring symptoms, those kind of things. And then, if so, how does that influence what you talk about with your patients?
Absolutely. I do speak with my colleagues in the Amyloidosis Center, and really, we all are bringing to the table our differing expertise to be able to provide holistic care for each person who we meet with. And so I consider like what I bring to the table of um, helping everyone understand what these family dynamics are looking like in the family and how is someone navigating this diagnosis. I really want to like dive deep into people's emotions, values, beliefs surrounding this condition and how it's playing a role in their family and being able to bring that to the medical team so that it's not only like thinking about it from a medical side of this is what their treatment's going to look like. Here we go delivering the recommendations to their clinic team at home, to their care team at home, um, but really thinking of this patient doesn't really want to do this kind of treatment that involves them coming into a clinic every month, but they would be open to this other form of treatment that may still be effective and helping to emphasize and humanize the that aspect for each patient who I meet with.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that, you know, this medical team, this amyloidosis care team really consists of so many different people because you bring a perspective that maybe a doctor doesn't, right? You, like you said, you're able to humanize kind of their wishes and their desires. Um, and that's a large part of function of your training. And so it's wonderful that you can help kind of guide other members of the team in thinking about doing ultimately what's best for the patient. So I think that's just so wonderful that patients have access to a member of the care team like you. But interestingly, I'm curious to know how much of your discussion with the patient is influenced by their specific amyloidosis variant. I know we know there are over 130, I think, different variants. So does that play a role in any way in your discussions? And then do the patient's family members get included in their discussions, or is it more of just a one-on-one with the patient that you're working with?
So that is a great question. I would say it does play a big role in how the conversation um, flows with each person because each variant does have those little nuances. And when do we expect the symptoms to occur?
Mhm.
Where do we expect the amyloidosis to build up in the body? And so that really lets me tailor my conversations. So now, one of the most common variants, the V122I variant for transthyretin amyloidosis, we typically see people develop symptoms in later adulthood, say like around someone's 60s, is what the research is saying. And most people develop cardiac amyloidosis. And every so often, they may experience other symptoms like neuropathy. So I can focus my conversation of here's when we might anticipate seeing symptoms. We would recommend, continuing to follow up with you. Let's say if someone's in their 30s or 40s, we wouldn't expect for them to show symptoms for a while, but want to keep an eye on you still to make sure that if something does develop, we're catching it as soon as we can. So I think a large part of this is tailoring that information, but emphasizing the importance of early detection so that we
Yeah.
can, you know, promote better treatment outcomes for each person. And thinking about your second question, Mackenzie, with are other family members included? It depends on what each person prefers. If they want to have a
Mhm.
support person there, recently I actually had someone in FaceTime their spouse to have them in the conversation too, because what they wanted to think about is how do we talk about this condition with our kids?
Mm,
I think that's another um, big thing that I talk with patients about is how do we even disclose this kind of news because this isn't quote unquote just a condition, right? It's
yeah.
a condition that can affect other members of the family um, beyond non-hereditary conditions. And so it takes on a new layer of information that can really impact their kids. And so having other members of the family there can help with supporting someone through that news
Mhm.
and also promote that dialogue between family members so that they can already get ideas going on how they can communicate with others. Because family knows family best. We're all members of the care team are all on the periphery here, but having family members there really helps to get that conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have these meetings, is it typically just one meeting? Is this something you do serially? So maybe before they have a genetic test, afterwards, is there sort of a standard, or is it different with each patient?
It's different with each patient and my role at the Amyloidosis Center. So, because we generally see people when they already have a diagnosis, it might be that
Mm,
they've already had genetic testing too. And
mhm,
so, I'm meeting with them to be able to hopefully fill in any gaps, talk about how other people in the family could look into genetic testing for themselves if they're interested in doing so. For other people, if they were just diagnosed with uh, transthyretin amyloidosis, but they haven't gone genetic testing to know if it's actually hereditary or actually the wild type form that's not hereditary, then I would speak with them twice
mhm.
before doing the test, make sure that they know all the benefits and drawbacks, and then again after the test to go over the results and maybe again to really review those results again and go into those details.
Yeah, and if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the timing of your meetings with patients and how that can fluctuate.
So I would say regarding the timing, it's oftentimes for me when they've already been diagnosed and I've only been with the amyloidosis center for a little over a year, so I'm really meeting with a lot of different people across their diagnostic or treatment odyssey to be able to help answer any questions they might have for themselves or for their family members. Um, and in thinking about family members who may not have any symptoms of amyloidosis but are considering genetic testing, we also talk about when might be an appropriate time for them to really consider that genetic testing.
Yeah. So clearly it sounds like a very nuanced and thoughtful. I'm not sure if that's entirely the right word, but a very maybe specific, based on each patient's particular situation, or kind
Yeah,
of like you said,
absolutely.
where they are in their treatment odyssey for sure.
Mhm.
Something I think is of peak interest to patients is help us to understand some of the limitations to genetic testing, certain considerations that patients should be aware of in advance. And I think another big thing is that patients, it's always in the back of their mind is confidentiality surrounding genetic testing. So I'd love if you could speak a little bit to that as well, please.
Ah, definitely. So I would say some limitations that exist around genetic testing is that there's still a lot that we have to learn about genetics in general. Now, the main hereditary form of amyloidosis that we think about is the transthyretin type. There are quite a few other rare hereditary forms of amyloidosis too,
Mhm.
like josolin or ApoA1, and we still have a lot of work to do to be able to determine um, what are these different variants in these other genes that might lead to a risk of amyloidosis.
Mhm.
And some of the points that I've thought about too, or that I've talked about include things like life insurance or also things like disability and long-term care insurance. And thinking about confidentiality, a lot of clinics don't do their genetic testing in the clinic. They send samples to a commercial genetic testing laboratory. So that information is kept between the clinic and the laboratory. But insurance companies are at liberty to be able to ask for that kind of information, to ask for genetic test results to determine coverage of that policy. And in certain states, there might be additional protections, but it really depends on the state and depends on how good those protections are. So, being based in Massachusetts, uh, I tell people, you know, there are some laws that say insurance companies can't require that you provide them with genetic test results. But if you don't send them the genetic test results, they can use that omission of information to still deny you coverage or still determine the policy. So it's not the best protection, and I'm hopeful that there can be more protections in place because this is important information to know.
Yeah, that's I'm very grateful for you sharing that kind of thing because so many people would never know that. So I think ultimately kind of the best thing that patients can do is go and speak with a genetic counselor, go and speak with someone who knows the sort of nuances of the process and can be available to answer any and all of your questions. So, Lucas, I want to thank you so much for your time today and sharing all your insights. It is so incredibly valuable to our amyloidosis community.
Oh, thank you so much, Mackenzie. I really appreciate you having me on.
Of course. So, in summary, I just love for you to share your message for patients who have not yet undergone genetic testing, but it's something that they're considering.
I'm, of course, biased, but I just really want to echo that last point that you made, Mackenzie, of if you're considering genetic testing and you're not sure, like, meet with a genetic counselor. We're not here to tell you to do genetic testing. We're here to give you the facts, and we're here to support you in whatever decision you have to make for yourself. And if that's a decision that might go against maybe what other healthcare providers are saying, what your family members are saying, I don't want my patients to feel pressured to have to do this test if it's not something they want to do right now. I want them to know that that option is always available and it's not going to go away the second that we close the door.
Well, I think that's wonderful words and great advice that is so relevant and beneficial to our community. And today's discussion about genetic testing is, like I said, so important for those affected by hereditary amyloidosis. And having you help us understand the purpose and the timing of the testing, how our interaction as patients with genetic counselors can help patients navigate their journey and impacting their broader family is just wonderful insight that you've given us. So I want to thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the All Things Amyloid podcast. If you find our podcast informative, please follow and share it with others. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at Mackenzie's Mission, please visit mm713.org. We'd also like to thank AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Bridge Biopharma for their sponsorship to help raise awareness about amyloidosis. We hope you stay tuned for future episode drops. Thanks for listening.